All right, let's talk about a game that truly took the world by storm. But it's more than just a game, right? It's this incredible flashpoint, this collision between hard historical fact and the raw power of myth. We're going to unpack the whole story of Ghost of Tsushima. And to really understand the myth that the game builds, we've got to go back to the beginning. We have to start with the brutal history that planted the seeds for this whole story. Okay, picture this. The year is 1274. We're on the real-life island of Tsushima. And this number, 80. That's how many samurai were left to defend their home. Just 80 of them, and they were up against an invading force of thousands of Mongol warriors. We're talking about a battle that was, well, it was basically over before it even started. Their leader, Sosuke Kuni, was killed, and that was that. An absolute slaughter. And this is exactly where the game kicks off, right in the middle of this catastrophic defeat. But it asks this one incredible question. What if one of them made it out alive? And right there, that's the pivot. This stops being a history lesson, and it becomes the birth of a legend. So that really brings us to the core question, doesn't it? How did a game made by an American studio, Sucker Punch, become this beloved, widely accepted vision of Japanese history, even in Japan itself? It's a fascinating puzzle, and that's what we're going to dig into. Okay, first step, crafting the samurai fantasy. See, right from the get-go, the developers were not trying to make some kind of dry documentary. No way. Their goal was to create an emotional, totally immersive experience. I mean, listen to what the lead concept artist said. They wanted it to be an expressive art form, not a perfect mirror of the real world. Their goal was crystal clear: create a samurai fantasy, something that felt authentic in its soul, even if all the historical details weren't, perfectly lined up. And they built this fantasy in some really clever ways. Instead of a map, you've got this guiding wind that just flows. The combat isn't a button-mashing mess. It's these tense, cinematic duels. You've got moments to pause and write haikus. And of course, the Kurosawa mode. It was all designed to make you feel like you were the hero in a classic samurai movie. And you know what? For so many players, it absolutely worked. People on forums, like this Reddit user, would say things like, yeah, the story is kind of what you'd expect, but it's done so well. And that's the key, right? The execution of that fantasy it landed. It really resonated with people. But as you might guess, that leads us to the other side of the coin. Section 2, a shallow homage. Because, yeah, not everyone was buying into this fantasy. Some critics started to argue that all those cinematic touches were, well, a little skin deep. And the main target of this critique, the famous Kurosawa mode. The argument was basically this. Yeah, the game looks like a Kurosawa film with its black and white filter, but Kurosawa's work was so much more than that. He was a master of cinematography with deep political and social messages woven into every frame. The game, critics said, just copied the surface-level aesthetic without any of that depth. And that repetition became a real problem for some. The argument went that when you see the same dramatic camera angle for the 10th, 20th, or 100th time, it stops feeling cinematic. It just starts feeling like a video game. It kind of breaks the spell, All right, which brings us to our third section, pure heroes, monstrous foes. And this is where the critique gets a lot deeper than just filmmaking techniques. The argument here is that the game takes a really complex piece of history and boils it down to a super simple black and white battle of good versus evil. So what the game does is it creates this curated version of history. It focuses really heavily on samurai honor and courage, which is great, but it also leaves out some of the more complex, maybe even uncomfortable, historical truths. A perfect example is the tradition of Shudo, these important mentorships and romantic bonds between samurai, which adds a whole other layer to their culture that the game just doesn't touch. And to really build up that heroic narrative for the samurai, some academics argue the game uses a pretty classic storytelling tool on the other side, on the Mongols, and that tool is dehumanization. And you can see it happen in a few key ways. First, most of what the Mongols say isn't subtitled, so their own motivations and politics just become background noise. Their culture? It gets turned into a bunch of collectibles, like trophies for you to find. And visually, their camps are always shown as these ugly scars on an otherwise perfect landscape. It all adds up to frame them not just as enemies, but as this monstrous polluting force. So, that brings us to the final piece of the puzzle. history versus myth-making. Because on one side, you have this incredibly beautiful, beloved game. And on the other, you have these really valid critiques about its history and its art. How do we square that circle? How do we make sense of it? Well, it seems the answer is that the game's incredible success wasn't about being a perfect history textbook. It succeeded because it was a powerful myth. It prioritized this emotional, authentic feeling truth over being 100% factually accurate. And that's an approach that players, especially in Japan, absolutely embraced. And nothing makes this clearer than comparing it to another big Western-made game set in Japan, Assassin's Creed Shadows. See, Ghost of Tsushima's approach was seen as a deeply respectful love letter. And the result? It was Game of the Year in Japan, and the creators were made tourism ambassadors. Contrast that with the Assassin's Creed trailer, which showed the desecration of a sacred shrine. That sparked a massive controversy and was seen as deeply insensitive. It really came down to the perceived intent. One felt like a tribute, the other, not so much. And the power of this myth-making wasn't just virtual. It had a huge real-world impact. Get this, fans of the game from all over the world came together and raised over $250,000 to help restore a real-life shrine on the actual Tsushima Island. I mean, that's just incredible. And you know, this entire conflict, this tension between the old way and the new, between history and myth, it's all perfectly wrapped up in the game's own story. You play as Jin Sakai, who's forced to abandon the honorable samurai code to save his people. And in the end, it all comes down to this heartbreaking choice the game forces you to make between the rigid code of the past and a new path forward. Ultimately, Ghost of Tsushima doesn't really give us an easy answer. It doesn't tell us which is right. Instead, it just leaves us with this huge, powerful question to think about. When we look to the past, what are we really looking for? The cold, hard facts or the feeling?